When we left part 2, Ripley was due for a nap, and while she napped, Bishop was traversing the tunnel from hell. Now, if you haven't seen the last 2 parts, you might want to check them out. But if you have, let's continue with our next scene, which is rumored to have been filmed and was mentioned in the novel, where Bishop ran into an alien as he crawled through the tunnel. There was a hole in the pipe caused by acid, and as he came near to it, an alien reacted to his movement by its inner jaws biting towards the hole. Bishop froze, and the creature simply went away disinterested. It is then that Bishop continues onward and makes it to the uplink tower. The deleted scene would have added a nice jump moment in a relatively calm period of preparation for the other characters, and it would have been interesting to see how a xenomorph would have reacted to Bishop. Though interesting, I'm kind of on the fence it's not in any version, because if the aliens are intelligent and they are engaged in a battle to defend their hive, not attacking anything that moved seems irresponsible or downright stupid. So if an alien did sense movement in a pipe, I would think it would have tried to tear apart the pipe to eliminate any possible threat inside. When Ripley wakes up, she immediately identifies that there is a threat when she sees big contagion tubes on the floor. Now, I'm going to sound very harsh towards this iconic scene. Still, this channel is all about deep diving into films, and that means the good and the bad. So I do have a couple of questions here. First, how the hell did Burke let these things free without being attacked himself? Secondly, those containers are big and was full of liquid with facehuggers inside. Now we know somehow Burke drained the liquid from these containers in the other room, because there is no huge pool in this room or around those tubes on the floor. Also, how are these placed on the floor without making loud noises in this acoustical room? Just a lid falling off one of these tubes would most likely wake up a light sleeper with ease in this room. In the end, this is my most difficult moment to suspend disbelief in the film, as it's hard to swallow. It doesn't break the movie for me, but we all know the facehuggers are extremely fast and aggressive. The moment Burke opened one of those tubes, a facehugger would have went after him mercilessly. A time lock is the only thing that might answer this, but that is made-up logic, as it's not in the film or novel. This setup is not the best moment of the film, but despite this, it leads into a very tense scene. After realizing what is going on and trying to break the glass, Ripley uses her cigarette lighter to start the fire alarm. In operations, Hicks jumps to life, and a thing to note is Burke. As everyone leaves, Burke stands in the background, not joining the group to save Ripley. You can see him putting his hand up to his face in frustration. He knows his goose is about to be cooked. Back in Med Lab, if you look closely, you can see the facehugger sitting there. I think during this scene, Ripley would have been a dead duck, because you can see as the frame is slowed down that the facehugger is just below her mouth as she falls, and she has no hands holding on to the creature. It was in a perfect position to go right to her mouth, and it didn't. The cut saved this after the fact by making it appear she was holding on to it, and it just goes to show how a good cut and, well, pacing can make you dismiss such things. Even when the facehugger is thrown in the direction just past Newt, it starts running towards Ripley. It has no cause to go after Ripley since Newt was closer and is a more opportunistic target for the facehugger. Newt is standing to the right of the med lab doorway, which we see when Hudson assists her. The facehugger would have to run near or past Newt to get to Ripley, though this was not in the FX shot. Despite these issues, I will defend an argument that I've heard many a commentator note. They state that there is no way Hicks would have got through that double-paned glass when Ripley couldn't even dent it with a chair earlier. To this, I say pay attention to the film, because Hicks yells, "Shoot it," and immediately afterwards, you see Hudson doing just that. Shoot it up! Hudson fires in an upward motion and fires 4 rounds at the window. This would have destroyed most of the integrity of the window. The real complaint should have been, why didn't Hicks get cut to hell? Hudson is great once again because Paxton just can't disguise his adrenaline, and it is perfect for the character he is playing. He saves Newt and goes ballistic shooting the Facehugger. At the end of his rampage, he yells at the Facehugger to fucking die. It's another blink and you'll miss it moment. The Burke debate plays out great, but if you haven't done this before, try watching the scene without focusing on Ripley, Burke, or Hicks. Note the background group's reaction to every word. The performances are just wonderful. Gorman seems disgusted over the situation, while Vasquez looks like she wants to murder him. When the alien onslaught arrives, the team is totally surprised and will even be shortly surrounded because apparently the ducts Newt leads them into were not sealed off earlier. Even when Burke sneaks away in a different direction, there are aliens too. There are some great shots in the battle if you slow things down, and Hudson has a grand farewell as he turns fearless just before being pulled into the floor. He shoots below him as he is pulled down, and you can see one of the aliens actually putting a hand over his face as he descends. Admittedly, it was great to see Burke get his comeuppance. However, his fate would later be explored in a deleted scene. Now, let's not mince words. Vasquez is a badass, and we all adored her over the years. She gives the aliens a run for their money. I truly hated to see her die in this movie, and often wondered if she would have survived in further alien films, how better many of them would have been. Gorman also gets his redemption trying to save her, and their death is quite a high moment in the entire franchise. As a repercussion of the explosion, Newt loses her footing and falls into this shaft. Now, as Ripley reaches down for her and grabs her coat, Newt slips. Now, anyone in their right mind would know that if they fell down this chute, they would die a horrible death, even at Newt's age. She would have held on to the inside of that coat for her dear life, and would have done so desperately. To not do so is just not realistic in my mind. I know my negative insights here might ruffle some more feathers because I've been doing a few since the start of Part 3, but the ones I have mentioned so far are some of the reasons why I believe the 1979 Alien is without a doubt the best of the franchise, and not this one. That's my take, and I'm sticking to it, right, wrong, or indifferent. The culmination of all of this is that Newt gets captured, and Hicks and Ripley barely get out of there before an alien tries to nab them. Hicks's gear is hit with acid, and if you look at his wardrobe in the next scene as they get off the elevator, you can see some of his clothing actually dissolved. Ripley, not wanting to leave Newt, has only one choice, and she gears up to go into the nest. Now, in the original script, the idea of remote piloting the second ship was not in the script. The theme of the alien tail and its stinger was more evolved, as Bishop actually found a way to neutralize the toxin in the sting so that one could move freely when taken hostage. It was discovered that the only way off the planet was to make it to a shuttle, which was deep inside the atmosphere processing station. That destination happened to be the heart of the alien lair. During the alien attack, the group devised that their only solution was to allow themselves willingly to be taken hostage by the aliens for impregnation, and then, when they reached the hive, they would free themselves, sneak on the shuttle, and then escape. However, when they arrive in the lair, they discover the Queen and a new alien that was introduced, which was like an albino alien that used a proboscis to create the hive and the cocoons that held people. Hicks is impregnated and orders Ripley to escape with Newt in the shuttle. Ripley then sneaks onto the shuttle with Newt and uses the shuttle engine thrusters to incinerate the egg chamber and escapes to the Sulaco. It was really good they went with the theatrical idea because it really lowers the threat of the aliens. To suggest that the creatures are predictable and will just go along with the surrender and will put all captives together right where the proposed shuttle is, and it happens to just be where the Queen waits, is just contrived. Theoretically, if an alien is near you, you should be dead, or you shouldn't be able to predict what it will do. Though they may take you for reproduction, they might just as soon kill you as like the first alien did with Lambert and Parker. The fact that Newt survives should be considered a miracle in itself and deserve to be the pinnacle of the film. I have always been curious about how the hive was made, so it really would have been neat to see that albino alien concept come to fruition, though. As Ripley leaves the ship, a final goodbye is made between Hicks and Ripley in this extended scene. However, there is not much time to linger, because Bishop states this.
There's still time.
In 19 minutes, this area is going to be a cloud of vapor the size of Nebraska.
Hicks, don't let them leave.
We ain't going anywhere.
Now the clock is ticking, and as Ripley ascends into hell, the first thing she discovers is the alternate fate of Burke when she finds him cocooned and about to give birth. He asks for help, and she gives him a grenade to end himself before rushing off to save Newt.
It's inside. Ow! God! God!
Now, I know a lot of folks like the idea of this scene, but it would not have worked at all. Not only did we see the alien bite down on Burke in the theatrical cut, but there is time to take into account.
The ship is on its way! ETA, 16 minutes! Good, stand by there, we're on our way!
Bishop! How much time?
Plenty, 26 minutes!
Had this scene been included in the film, the movie would have proposed that within a half-hour period, which is generous, from encountering the alien, Burke was hauled back to the processing station, cocooned, impregnated, and came to term by the time Ripley encountered him. Such a timeline is a bit ludicrous for the life cycle of the alien inside him, and harkens more to the stupidity of later alien films. So this is perhaps the worst deleted scene in this film, in my opinion. Now that I've nitpicked the time of Burke's gestation like a super nerd, let's look at a really cool timeline. From the moment Bishop tells Ripley they have 19 minutes to escape, to the moment the explosion occurs, it takes around 15 to 16 minutes of screen time. This allows time for the Burke scene to happen and extra walking time that was not needed to be shown in the final cut. Something to remember is just about 10 minutes ago, Ripley and Hicks escaped the operations complex, so no doubt the majority of the hive is still searching that place for survivors. So it makes sense that Ripley does not run into a bunch of the creatures. What's also logical is that there were a few left behind to protect their queen. After the two mothers communicate a truce, I was always curious if the egg opening was precipitated by the queen or the egg itself instinctually. It seems kind of crazy to antagonize this dangerous human, since the queen would know from earlier experiences just how damaging a flamethrower could be to her egg chamber. I still find the events interesting and wonder if the queen reneged on her ceasefire or was a victim of circumstance. Once Ripley lets loose, all bets are off, as the Queen has every reason to kill this human with contempt. As Ripley is wasting the last of their ammo in a fit of rage, there are many things you can find in the background, but I'm just going to show you one such thing, and I don't know if this was a gaffe or on purpose. It seems something is going on at the top of the screen by her head. It is either an alien moving around or a crewman showing up in the shot. It could even be part of the set bursting because you can see liquid dripping away from it, possibly flammables to keep the fire raging in the background. After this moment, Ripley encounters no other aliens unless there was cut footage, so if it was an alien, the film implies the surviving creature did not chase her, but rather fled. I find this unlikely, especially when the Queen is in danger. Anyone know anything about this shot? It is only appropriate that Jerry Goldsmith's creature theme from the first film was played as the Queen stalked after Ripley hatefully. It's a nice touch. Another nice touch is showing that the Queen is semi-intelligent and figures out that the elevator is the only way to chase after Ripley. There are some in the alien community who believe that Bishop left the area not to circle around the facility, but to procure an alien egg for the company, because it is one of the few explanations possible for the setup to Alien 3 that's justifiable, or the hinted foreshadow during the end credits of this film. They also suggest that Bishop knocked out Hicks with a sedative, so there would be no witnesses.
He's gonna be all right. He's just out. I had to give him another shot for the pain.
The novel goes so far to say that Hicks verbally resisted further medication, but relented as Bishop administered it. I don't know what to think of this theory because I see Bishop as a good entity, especially in consideration for Lance Henriksen's take on the character and how he was depicted in Aliens and in Alien 3. But it is possible, even though the idea that Bishop could find an egg, get it back to the ship in time to get Ripley, is pretty far-fetched. Now in the novel, as Ripley stands by the rail when the Queen is revealed, Ripley was originally going to toss herself and Newt over the rail rather than be killed by the vengeful Queen. It's very morbid, but realistic. However, this does not come to fruition because Bishop saves the day. When the nuclear blast occurs, we need to address the damage radius of the explosion because it is relevant to the derelict ship on the planet. This is the exact yield Bishop describes.
How long till it blows?
4 hours. With a blast radius of 30 kilometers, equal to about 40 megatons.
The blast radius of 30 kilometers is the physical impact zone of the explosion. You can pretty much guarantee everything within 18.6 miles would be incinerated according to Bishop's statement. In real life, such a blast is suggested to be more like 6 miles, but this nuke is in the future, so we can forgive variances. Now I want you to think about that size. To be generous, let's round this blast radius to 20 miles. That would not consume the planet physically. Sure, with the bad weather and rain, radiation and debris would pretty much go everywhere, but that would be it. Physically, 10 to 30 miles in every direction away from the blast zone, the landmass and structures would be the same, since this planet is basically a rock without vegetation. Now remember in my first video, I noted that Lydecker in Hadley's Hope Command Center said this.
You remember you sent some wildcatters out in the middle of nowhere last week, out past the Ilium range?
Yeah, what?
Well, one of them's on the horn, mom and pop survey team. Says he's on to something.
There was a reason I mentioned that in part 1 because this states that the Jordans are over a week away from the colony. Now I want you to imagine a 20-mile car trip. That doesn't take a week. Usually it takes a half an hour at 40 miles per hour. Now the Jordan's truck looks like they have to go slower, so let's say they travel 20 miles an hour to be generous. They have been driving around for a week away from their home. How is it that the physical blast would affect the derelict in any way, even at 20 miles an hour in 1/4 of a week's time? The point is, it wouldn't. To get even more technical, the planet of LV-426 is about 745 miles, according to Canon.
All right, well, that's it. It's a planetoid. 1,200 kilometers.
It's tiny.
The nuclear blast would only physically destroy a minute amount of that planet, So what I'm saying is that the derelict ship is still structurally fine and filled with eggs wherever it is after aliens occurred. And the whole plot for Alien Resurrection was not even needed because Ripley did not wipe out the species. With the right radiation gear and equipment, one could return to the derelict and mess with this species again. To assume it's otherwise states that the Jordans have been driving around for a week only 20 miles away from the colony. It's all about distance and time, and neither of them can be calculated to the destruction of the derelict. Now, I am not arrogant enough to see my opinion as absolute, even though I know there are some out there who believe every opinion they have is absolute. I could very well be missing something on this point, especially when Bishop changes the yield for the blast later by saying something different than what he said earlier.
How long till it blows?
4 hours. With a blast radius of 30 kilometers, equal to about 40 megatons.
Still time.
In 19 minutes, this area is going to be a cloud of vapor the size of Nebraska.
Nebraska is about 430 miles long and 210 miles wide. But as the ship flies away, you don't see the blast igniting a hemisphere, or the entire planet, which is 745 miles long. I find it very difficult to subscribe to the idea that the derelict is absolutely destroyed, because the visuals, the math, and the science do not add up to back up what the sequels say in the future. But let's move on. The epic battle with the Queen upped the ante from the first film, even though it used the same shoot the creature out of the airlock trope we are used to by now. The fight is just about perfect until Ripley opens the airlock door, because her being in that atmosphere would not have boded well for her, including the fact that climbing a ladder would be next to impossible, with such suction pulling at her. A quick moment that you can catch is when Newt is sliding towards the airlock. You can see the hole Lance Henriksen is standing in during older versions as he reaches for her. Later releases have CGI'd this out, but I prefer the practical effects, warts and all, because that is what made this movie such an achievement. Cameron gathered some hungry FX folks, and they made everything work with a very small budget. Even later versions of the Queen just don't look as good as this one, and with an $18.5 million budget, that's saying something. Comparatively, here are some other sci-fi films made within 3 years of this movie, and you can see how much bang for the buck this film really had. To make this film on the budget they did was a miracle, and there are many who deserve recognition. Of course, we can easily cite Stan Winston and his company, but two people I really want to note is Robert and Dennis Skotak. These two worked with James Cameron and Gale Ann Hurd on Battle Beyond the Stars in their Roger Corman days. The moment Hurd was given the role of producer, the first people they called were these two. The Skotaks were vital for this film to be done on the budget they had, and they had experience bringing films in at low budgets, like Escape from New York and, of course, Corman films. When they were hired, the Skotaks were part owners of a company known as LA Effects Group, which was founded in 1983 and was currently working on films such as Explorers, City Limits, and Creature. Out of loyalty to their company, they wanted to include the LA Effects Group in making Aliens. Hurd and Cameron just wanted the Skotaks, but they relented and let the company take part in the film. The other owners of the company was Larry and Suzanne Benson. Larry handled the business and financial side of the company, and his wife Suzanne sometimes acted as a secretary. The goal of the Skotaks was to focus on the effects of aliens, while the Bensons would manage the business side of their jobs to help them focus. At least that was the goal in the beginning. At first, everything seemed fine. Cameron decided to film in Europe to save money, and LAE agreed to send art effects equipment to Pinewood because most of the tools there were outdated. It would be Susan who would oversee this while her husband stayed in America to keep running LAE. When the movie began production, the Skotaks had enormous pressure on them. The British crew didn't quite understand why these guys were running the effects, since the British did Alien in the past. The Skotaks were responsible for 144 visual shots for this movie. This included every miniature effect, from the Queen to Power Loader, the Colony, the Atmosphere Processor, the Dropship, the Narcissus, the Derelict, planet exteriors, matte paintings, and other assorted shots. They also had to do all this with less money than any other films made at the time. Despite all this responsibility and culture clashes, the real problem for the Skotaks was the secretary who was given the title line producer, Susan Benson. A line producer is basically a middle person who communicates to the director of the film, to the effects team. However, Cameron went straight to Robert and Dennis Skotak rather than Suzanne because they were who he wanted for the film, and LAE assumed this bureaucracy was needed. While the rest of the visual effects worked mostly 7 days a week, and often more than 12 hours a day, Susan Benson would come in late constantly and left early often. During the weekends, she took trips to France and was noted to be a real shopper with no skills for movie making, according to several effects artists working on Aliens. In the end, she did little to contribute besides sending bureaucratic memos to the Skotaks, which impeded their focus. For instance, when there was misunderstandings with the British unions and their culture, rather than allow the Skotaks to adapt and learn like mature adults, Suzanne saw it as an opportunity to send out memos berating them. It got even worse when Suzanne sent them memos that had nothing to do with their work life. For instance, the Skotaks and one of their model makers, Pat McClung, who I will go into shortly, lived in a 700-year-old home with terrible heating. During the harsh winter, they were freezing and had to turn on these ovens to heat the house where they huddled to get warmth. The maid complained about the oven being on one day, and Suzanne saw it as an opportunity to micromanage and write more memos. Here are parts of the memo she wrote. "You could have burned the house down. Oh, the entire neighborhood is going to be upset with us. And if you can't toe the line, you'll have to find your own living accommodations." Dennis Skotak noted that it was the last straw, and he had this to say about it. "We've got enough problems without having to be scolded like children to not leave the burner on. We don't need to be told that. We weren't using the burners that way by accident. It was to solve a very difficult and unpleasant situation. It was much ado about nothing, really. These memos were a hindrance to us and an embarrassment that undermined our credibility with our crews. Do this, don't do that, down to how we use electricity in the house. What are you trying to do to us here?" That brings us to the next person in this story, Pat McClung. Pat was hired from day one to be one of the main miniature effects guys for the movie. Pat was with the Skotaks in the trenches, and after the memo of the house situation, Pat went into Suzanne's office and gave her hell. Suzanne's son had some words to say to Pat, and McClung stated he was lucky that he did not get knocked on his ass. As one could easily predict, shortly after the office meeting, Pat was told by LAE that they didn't have the budget to maintain him on the set, even though he was critical to the Skotaks' plans. Pat said he would stay for free, but of course he couldn't for insurance reasons. In the end, Suzanne removed Pat, making more work for the Skotaks and the crew. Yet before being forced out, Pat went to Gail Ann Hurd to tell her about the nightmare the team was being put through by Suzanne and how she worked against them and the film at every turn. As you guessed, things escalated, and now Cameron was getting involved. In no time, Gail Ann Hurd had this to say about the situation. The LAE executives were learning that they couldn't pull the wool over the director's eyes because he was too technologically savvy for that. As a result of all this, Cameron, Hurd, the Bensons, Robert and Dennis Skotak, and Fox executive Tim Hampton had a meeting on December 14, 1985. During the meeting, it was complained that Cameron was working with Robert and Dennis as if they answered only to him, thus cutting out LAE, which was Cameron's original desire in the first place. LAE was only there because of Robert's honorable loyalty to the company. In the end, no ground was made, and the LAE Effect Company was terminated from the film during the Christmas break of 1985. The Skotaks would remain as they were critical to the film as originally intended by Galen Hurd and James Cameron. The very first thing that happened after Suzanne was gone was the Skotaks rehired Pat McClung to be the head of model making, who was ousted from the project by Suzanne. Pat McClung stated this about the time he got the call. "Every fiber of my being didn't want to go. I thought, I just can't do it, but I owe the guys. I've got to go back." Dennis verified this and said McClung was beside himself over the idea of returning to such a difficult shoot. On the 1st of January 1986, all LA people not directly answering to the Skotak brothers had to leave the set, and the Skotaks trudged forward even when Robert caught pneumonia. During his ailment, Robert worked through it as he couldn't stop. He would lay on the floor, huddled by a heater, directing. The shoot was really difficult, and even Stan Winston was sympathetic to the situation. On a cold winter day, the Skotaks and Winston were literally crying in frustration, and Winston said, "We have to stay in love. This is such a great movie. It's going to be so... people will love this." When LAE was terminated, there were 100 shots left to do out of the 144 shots the Skotaks had to make for the film. At the time, only 44 shots were finished. Yet Susan Benson would later lie to Cinefantastique magazine that by the time LAE was terminated, they already finished 70 to 80% of the film effects. With a bruised ego, LAE would send their lawyer to collect depositions from effects people on the set while they were trying to work, and things were coming to a nasty place. Fox Studios really got pissed by this and threatened to remove screen credit for LAE or to withhold certain fees owed. LAE would even stoop as low to try to copyright their shots and structures designed for the film by Robert and Dennis Skotak to block their use in the movie in June 1986, 1 month before the film was to release, thus trying to sabotage the film completely. Finally, an out-of-court settlement was reached, and Fox ensured LAE would get visual effects credit and awards, if any. Cameron and Hurd had no comment, while the Fox attorney dealing with the situation said, "The matter is part of the public record." When the film came out, Fox noted LAE in the credits by saying, "Certain visual effects by LAE." Aliens was nominated for visual effects, and because of legalities, Susan Benson was nominated, along with Stan Winston, Robert Skotak, and John Richardson. This meant that Susan took a spot for other well-deserving people who did the visual effects. On March 30th, 1987, at the Oscars, Aliens won visual effects. It was agreed that Suzanne and Robert Skotak would say nothing for the award, and that Stan would speak for the Skotaks, and Richardson would speak for the crews. However, like the opportunistic harpy Suzanne seemed to be, she hovered by the mic, and she wouldn't budge from her position waiting for the moment to speak, so much so that Richardson had to squeeze in to get some words off. Robert Skotak said he saw her moving in after Richardson and Winston spoke, and he said something to limit her undeserved moment. And as the music played, she had a chance to say a few words. Here is the full clip of the moment.
Speaking for us all, including Dennis Skotak and Brian Johnson and the entire effects team, we'd like to thank the members of the Motion Picture Academy, our producer, Gail Ann Hurd, and most of all, the creative genius responsible for it all, Jim Cameron. Thank you, Jim.
We'd also like to thank our respective crews who went to make up the Anglo-American team, because they did all the work. Thank you, fellas. Thank you, Academy.
Great recognition. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
In the elevator, leaving the award show, Suzanne actually had the gall to grab Robert Skotak and kiss him in front of Nimoy, Shatner, Stan Winston, and John Richardson in excitement. Robert just stayed cool and gentlemanly and later stated it was very awkward. Many of the visual effects crew who worked on Aliens were very upset and estranged that Suzanne got the award out of legalities. At the time of making this video, Wikipedia applauds Susan Benson, noting that she was the first woman who won the Academy for Visual Effects, as if she had a part in crafting the film. A sentence on the page even claims she was also hard at work on Aliens while doing other films. It even falsely states that she worked alongside Robert Skotak, despite the fact that she worked against him, and later against the film in every way LAE could. Now, when you look up Robert's brother, Dennis, who worked on all, if not the majority, of the 144 visual effects with his brother Robert, who won the Academy Award, this is his Wikipedia page. It doesn't even acknowledge that he worked on Aliens, even though he has major credit on the film, and yet Suzanne gets paragraphs of her secretarial triumphs of trying to impede the movie. Kathleen Kennedy, move aside. In the future, Robert Skotak would continue to change the industry despite the Aliens production and his ordeals with LAE. He would pioneer films like The Abyss, Terminator 2, Batman Returns, and Tremors, to name a few. His Wikipedia page at least shows some recognition for his career. In contrast, Susan's so-called brilliant pioneering, which includes just 5 movies beyond Aliens, lists her in a secretarial producer capacity with exception to Creature. The films she got specific visual effects credit for were cheap and lackluster at best. The good news was that LAE basically disappeared from Hollywood quickly after the event of Aliens. Hopefully, they were blacklisted for the things they'd done to try to stop this movie. During the release of this video, what the inaccurate Wikipedia fails to mention about Suzanne was that the Academy later got word of all that happened with Aliens, and the rules of nominating visual effects would be changed. Dennis Skotak stated this in the Making of Aliens book by J.W. Rinzler. What happened ultimately is that the Motion Picture Academy changed the rules, so that if anybody's going to be awarded an Oscar, they actually need to have had experience in doing what they're receiving it for their skills. Today, the rules for winning visual effects state, Oscars can be given only to those directly involved with and principally responsible for the visual effects achieved. Additional names will not be considered. The Visual Effects Award is a craft award. Producers, coordinators, and other executives are not eligible for this award unless they are also craftspeople with primary creative responsibility for the achievement. No matter where you go on the internet, little states the truth about Susan Benson, and usually she is applauded for winning the Academy because of her gender, despite the morality of her true involvement with the film. A more worthy effects artist was bumped off winning an award for Aliens because of a clause in a legal document where this person stole that place. Someday, I hope this can be corrected, but at the very least, this video can help spread the truth about this persona beyond the documented interviews and the great work done by J.W. Rinzler, who documented this in his book. Thus, Aliens changed not only the Alien franchise, but it is linked with the changing of the Academy Awards itself and cinema forever. It's a great action film, and it really changed the gears of the franchise. Although this is not my favorite Alien film, it's a film I've seen at least 100 times, and will no doubt see more, and it never gets old. Well, with that said, we are at the end of another video. We hope you enjoyed our take on Aliens, and we will see you in our next video within 4 weeks.
Sleep tight. Affirmative.
If you like what you see here, click like and subscribe.